And hello, Felix. Good afternoon, good morning to you.
Hey, good morning. Thanks for having me.
Well, it's great to have you. Long awaited, and we're so pleased to finally have you on the show. Felix, you are in Berlin at the moment?
Oh, no. I'm just down the street. I'm on Canal Street.
All right, okay. I was thinking you had your windows there had a slightly post-industrial Berlin vibe, but I was
Well,
mistaken.
I guess it's the same post-industrial vibe on Canal Street.
Right. So you've just come back.
I just came back. Yeah. I was
Okay.
I was out of the country for 2 months.
Yes. Okay. Well, I hope your travels were good. Do let us know in the chat box where you are viewing in from if you're listening, because we always like to know where people are. And as Lucy said, do put your questions into the chat box as we speak, and we'll get back to them at the end. Felix, we have so much to look at that I thought we might as well go ahead and start looking at some pictures now, starting with the magazine pinup. So this is the first topic that we want to take on. We're going to be talking about the multifarious and adventurous activities of Felix Burrichter, which are very difficult to encompass in one conversation. So eventually we'll be getting to your curatorial activities at the end of the interview. But you have also been really a kind of fearless and influential editor in the design world. And in fact, your magazine is now approaching its 15th anniversary. Is that correct?
Yeah. Well, next year. Yeah.
Next year. So that's a lot of magazines, and we can see some of the covers here. I wonder if you could just tell us first about how pinup started and what the foundational ideas of it were, and then sort of what's happened since and how it's changed.
It started 15 years ago. Almost 15 years. It started actually in the summer of 2005. I was working at a corporate architecture firm. So I'm trained as an architect originally, and I was working at a corporate architecture firm. And I was, well, how should I say it? I didn't love my job, and I was looking for a way to, there was a discrepancy between the architecture that the studies, the architecture studies, and actually working as an architect in a corporate office. And I was looking for sort of an outlet to where I could pour all my other interests around the subject of architecture and design, but that didn't have anything to do with the work that I was doing, designing sort of curtain walls for casinos in Macau. So that's kind of where the idea was born. I'd always been fascinated with magazines. I'd interned throughout my entire studies for architecture, not architecture magazines, anything but architecture magazines. And so the idea of a biannual glossy, if you like, I don't think anybody ever uses that term anymore, but that was kind of the idea. It was a sort of triple confluence of on the one hand kind of queering architecture, creating a glossy magazine, but that's at the same time a Trojan horse for ideas about architecture and sort of critical space making, if you want to call that.
One thing that I've always loved is that the slogan or byline in a way.
I don't know where to look because there's so many covers right here.
Where do we start? But the slogan of the publication is something like the only biannual magazine for architectural entertainment.
Well, it's magazine for architecture entertainment, but originally it was magazine for adult architectural entertainment. At some point we dropped the adult before the first issue, but so I think that seemed actually in 2006, and the magazine launched in 2006 on Halloween actually, with a party at the Urban Center right behind St. Patrick's Cathedral, with a party, a launch party with a kind of half-naked construction workers. So the idea was always to introduce this concept of entertainment in architecture, which in 2006 seemed much more radical than it does in 2020. I think because that you know I think the way we consume architecture and design now has very much become entertainment through your screen, and that was not the case in 2006. So I think we've actually reached a point of where architectural entertainment is real. It's no longer just pinup. But it was actually, I think among architects especially, the mere thought of having entertainment next to it was seemed almost insulting.
Yeah, I kind of want to explore that a little bit more with you, and maybe I'll show some of the spreads because we have quite a few of them to look at as we talk here. Here's one of the adult moments there. But it makes me think a little bit of Rem Koolhaas maybe and some of his earlier interventions, but also makes me think about the notion of the starchitect, the critique of spectacle culture as it's expressed in architecture, and whether you were involved in some kind of provocation about architecture's self-imposed seriousness and trying to show that architecture was already implicated in pop culture and mass culture, and trying to sort of, explore that messy mid-ground between architectural theory, academic presumption on the one hand, and the space in which architecture actually meets the public. Is that a fair description of what you were trying to accomplish?
Yeah, I think, I mean, and these are things sometimes that I only really, that were done not always fully consciously. I mean consciously, and I was fully conscious while making these decisions, but maybe not necessarily conscious of the reasons why I was making these decisions. And I think it did have to do with the fact that, architecture does take itself very seriously. But at the same time, it is enmeshed in all the kind of, the capitalist, consumer sort of treadmill, and it likes to kind of think that it isn't. And I think, the pinup was one of the hopes of pinup was kind of to also subvert this I think pretentiousness or the pretense. Sorry, not pretentiousness. The pretense of being above being above the fray, when really architecture is as much part of culture of the culture that everything that surrounds us.
Yeah, it is the fray. In fact,
it is the fray. Exactly. It's actually the stage. So I think that was a big part of it.
One of the things that in choosing which spreads to show this morning, one of the things that we thought we might do is show how many of the guests that we've had on Design and Dialogue this year have also been featured in pinup over the years. And I suppose that was partly a way of acknowledging the extraordinary work that you've done in creating a sense of community and discourse within a certain group of people. So here, for example, we see Amalia Andros from Colombia, who was interviewed by my colleague Stephen Burks recently on the program. And I wonder if you could talk a little bit about the sense of a network or community that's built around and through the magazine, and how that's been for you over this long period of time, and so many issues and so many people. So how can you describe the kind of social fabric of pinup as a project?
Well, I think the social fabric of the pinup network is a really interesting one, even for me, because I don't always fully understand it. It is, I think its biggest strength is its eclecticism. And so you create connections and sort of crossovers where maybe you wouldn't necessarily expect it, and so the network goes from the academic realm to the industrial design or commercial design industry, to even to fashion and graphic design, and yeah, and I mean maybe design, sort of the design network. I mean, there's also several strata of that. Whether we're talking collectible design or and the art world, of course. So I think it covers it casts a very wide net, but at the same time, I think the sensibility, the magazine sensibility or pinup sensibility is at the same time very specific. So that as a result, you have a very eclectic network where people meet from very different disciplines and backgrounds, age groups, and I think that's something that has remained the same throughout since the first issue. And I think that's probably one of the things that the diversity of it, is something that I can say I'm pretty proud of.
For sure. What about the design identity of the magazine itself? Even as we're flipping through virtually these pages, we can see that there's also a lot of variation in that respect. So it's not just what you're talking about, but also how.
Right. Well, throughout the well, I keep saying 15 years, but it's only been 14 and a few months. So throughout the years, I've worked with. I think one of the first things I learned working on pinup or making the magazine was that architects, which I am by training, are not graphic designers. And so I was lucky enough to start working directly with two really, really talented graphic designers who are Jeff Han and Dylan Faccaretta. And they first worked together, and then Dylan kept working throughout, I think, until almost issue 17 or 18. And then Erin Knudsen, she took over from Dylan, and she worked on it for 5 years. And now we're working with Ben Gans on the fall issue. So it's been a really the collaboration with the designers, to me, is a crucial part of the project, because, and I think this goes back to the idea of that what I was just talking about, the eclecticism of the content and also of the network. The design is really what holds these sometimes seemingly disparate ideas and confluences together. So the design is a really, really important part of it. And sometimes we've been accused of over designing, but I think that without a good designer, and every designer I've worked with so far has been actually not just good, they've been excellent. So I think they really hold the whole thing together. And it's extremely important.
I understand when you said
I cannot stress the importance of graphic design more than more in this interview, actually.
Well, I was going to ask you a kind of follow-up there, because I appreciate that you're not trained as a graphic designer, but surely you must have had a tremendous amount to say over the years about the look of the graphics in pinup.
Oh yeah, no. I have, I definitely have opinions, and I guess I am the creative director, because it kind of is, everything kind of works together. But I am very aware that I'm not a graphic designer. So I really prefer, even the smallest kind of detail, I prefer when an actual professional looks over it before it goes out.
Yeah, understood. But how would you describe the sensibility then, visually, which I think has also been influential?
Sensibility of, well, I think the one key element of the pinup design is its use of very basic typefaces. Default. We started with 3 default typefaces in 2006, which were Courier, Arial, and Times New Roman, or Times. I don't I don't remember.
Really
I think
bog standard typefaces.
Oh, yeah, exactly. And then we moved into just Arial, and we've pretty much been using Arial through. I think even what we're looking at right now is a version of Arial with the round edges. But we've been pretty much using Arial throughout every single issue of Been Up, with sometimes introducing a little typeface here and there. But Arial has always been the base typeface throughout, and in a weird way, it's this very default generic typeface that holds the issue together graphically. So even our logo is Arial. There was years ago, there was a really interesting kind of thread. It wasn't on like some design blog where they were discussing the detail of the P in pinup, and they were trying to figure out, some design nerds were trying to figure out what typeface it exactly was, and they all settled on that it must have been like a custom typeface. And yeah, that was it was Arial.
Nice. Well, it does strike me though that typeface is allowing you to do something incredibly dynamic on the page, and this is a great example of it. I would even, with some hesitation, describe it as a kind of postmodern approach to assembling the composition. A lot of floating elements, a lot of clashing type sizes, and kind of misregistrations sometimes, it seems to me. So things seem like they're jumping around a lot, and they can shift and slide, and there's almost a quasi-digital quality even to the pages. When you look at them, they feel pasted together. And I wonder if you could comment on that part of the look.
Postmodern.
Feel free to refuse that term forcefully, because that's my experience. Whenever I use the word postmodern, people tend to go, "No, it's not that."
No, well, I'm just trying to think. If I'm thinking about the meaning of postmodern, whether this qualifies as postmodern, because you use classical. I think the general sort of impulse or intention is to use something that is, and maybe there's a parallel in the same way that we treat the subject of architecture in the magazine, or all across Pinup's platforms, is that we use something that is some almost ubiquitous, and to a point where you sometimes don't even notice it, because most of the time I think you're more, you might not even appreciate the space you're in, or the the architecture you're in. So in a way, I mean, on a very different scale, obviously, a typeface like Arial is very much that. It's almost, Arial is almost like that administrative building that you never actually paid attention to until it was torn down, kind of. So and to use that and create something that is extraordinary and very different. I mean, if you look at from issue 1 to 28 that we have out right now, is that using the same element but creating completely different experiences. So I think that is the excitement, the challenge, and also the beauty of doing that. So I don't know if I call that postmodern. I don't have a word for it, but I think that is the impulse, to use something that is seemingly banal and create magic.
Right. Yeah. So let me ask you one last question.
It's magic, really. That's what it is.
It is magic. I mean, for example here, Pedro Friedeberg's pages from the magazine talk about magic. But let me ask you one last question about the magazine before we move on to the curatorial projects, which is just about using a magazine as an instrument these days. Because of course, the period in which you've been publishing has been the great rush online. As you've said, that has turned architecture culture into more of an entertainment industry in and of itself, that kind of virtualization. And I suppose there's also an economic set of considerations that you're constantly facing with respect to how successful a magazine can be these days. So can you talk a little bit about what it means to be doing this as a magazine specifically, as opposed to some other?
As a print magazine, yeah.
Print magazine.
Well, I think it's become, I like, especially more recently, I like to refer to the print publication as a sort of our couture collection, because it is the, it may not be our sole source of income, and may not be the biggest money maker, especially not right now, but I think it is where the ideas have the most room, ideas to play, have kind of, because you're kind of in it's almost like an atelier atmosphere, right? Because you have, 5 or 6 months to prepare an issue. And so you give a lot more thought to it than you would when you have the pressure to produce a project or a story for online. So I think, there's always considerably more thought put into the print project than there is in any other outlet. That being said, I think the digital has become hugely important for us, for everyone. No revelation there. But also in the sense that, it has, because you realize your responsibility as a platform for, for community, but also for the kind of message that you bring out into the world. And I think that's where you really, and especially in recent years, and especially most recently, given the crises that we're facing right now, you realize, the voice that you have and the responsibility that comes with it. When pinup started, George Bush was president. It seems so crazy to even think about that. So I think the diversity that I was talking about earlier has become even more important than ever for us, and really making our voice heard and important, and also making a lot of great variety of voices heard through pinup. It's always been a priority, but I think now even more so, especially given the many different ways of putting your message out there that you have available. So I hope that answers.
On that note, maybe we could turn to your exhibition practice. I'm tempted to ask you a question about publishing under the Trump administration, but I'm not going to do that. Let's instead talk about your work as a curator. So we're going to be looking at 3 projects, which are quite different from one another, in fact, beginning with this one, which is called Superbenches. Suitably pastoral shot here to begin with. Can you say a little bit about
shoes in the trees
about taking this project on it and what you were trying to accomplish with it?
Yeah. Well, this is a project that happened in 2017, and it's called Superbenches, and it was initiated. I was approached by the Greek architect and artist Andreas Angelidakis, and he was working with a community near Stockholm. Actually, it's not Stockholm itself; it's a satellite town, and it's one of the satellite towns from the 1960s and 70s. Stockholm was actually very segregated in a way. It's something not maybe commonly known, but it is. Especially in the over the past 40 years, as more and more people have come, more and more immigrants and refugees have come to Sweden, they've been sort of tucked away neatly in little satellite towns around the capital, and this is one of them. So they have a park in the city called Järfälla, Järfälla, I hope I'm saying it right. And they had the park in the middle of the town that didn't have any public amenities. And so the developer decided to make funds available to create new seating, and that's how the project was born. Superbenches it was called, and I invited designers and architects, including Ifani Ogunwu here on the right. We have Soft Baroque, Max Lamb, Schultens and Byings. They actually worked with the existing benches that were there, so there were a few benches already. And it really was about kind of reclaiming the space that had sort of been forgotten by the municipality. So it was a rare case of in a country where usually public funds are very generous. In this case, actually, they had sort of forgotten a little bit about this park, and it was a private initiative to create these new benches and public spaces in the park. So here you have Soft Baroque on the right, Luca Cipolleti on the left. I really love this Soft Baroque bench because it was made with the springs from the kind of the toys that you have not toys, but on a playground. But I don't even know what they're called, but the same kind of springs, but used for a bench. So it really bounced around. It was actually
that's one of the interesting things, Felix, about the way that you work, because I feel like you have a loose collective of designers that are constantly in orbit around you. And as you go fearlessly from one thing to another, either as an editor or a curator, you often bring them with you. And Soft Baroque would be a good example of that.
Soft Baroque is a very good example. They've been sort of low key. It snuck them into almost every project. Yeah.
Yeah, and I wonder if you could say a little bit as we look at other pictures of the Superbenches project. I wonder if you could talk a little bit about those conversations and how they unfold over the course of multiple years. What is your role as compared to what their role is, and what are those conversations like as you build those relationships?
And I'm seeing a question here. Somebody is asking to name the names of the architects. Is that right?
Yeah, if you can.
Are we answering questions now, or how does it work?
Well, if you want to identify what's in the.
The one we're looking at right now is Jonathan Olivars, and is part of what do you call that? Bowling, I guess. Is that
like a bull court or potato court?
Yeah. Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
Okay, so to answer your question, sorry, what was it?
Well, it's really about cultivating relationship with designers over multiple projects and multiple years.
Yeah, I mean, it's very. I mean, I haven't done that many shows. Working as a curator, it's really kind of like I do it when I feel that there's a great amount of freedom, and I'm not I don't even know if I'm not a trained curator. I'm not an art historian. I'm not so it really is. These curatorial projects that I've done over the years have been very much sort of more passion projects, very successful passion projects, but still passion projects. So I think that there's usually a greater narrative to. It's not solely about the objects. So there's a greater narrative to the shows. If anything, the Superbenches ones was the one with the least narrative, because the park already was kind of provided the unfolding for it. The one at Friedman Benda that I'm sure we're going to talk about earlier last year, and then also Swiss Institute, I think, which you wanted to talk about. There was this sort of, they always worked on like 3 levels. There was a kind of overall conceptual framework that usually related to space and the perception of space, and also kind of the current state of the way we live. Really, I always, they always kind of dealt with interiors. So they always have a certain sensibility with regards to space, to interior space, and sort of kind of a sense of subversion. And I think I naturally gravitate towards work by people who also, do things that don't necessarily are what they seem, or that kind of have an additional layer to them. And soft Baroque, you mentioned soft Baroque. Their work very much represents that sensibility to me. So, which is why they, like you said, they kind of showed up. They popped up in every single one. There's a really good interview with them in the current issue, which you can also check out on the website if you can't afford the magazine.
I guess we should just name check what we're looking at here, Felix. Does that?
Oh yes. Okay. So on the left is Philippe Malouin. This is his bench. He actually created a whole pavilion, and which successfully became sort of I think it was a very successful project for him, in the sense that he made several and has been sort of just distributing them through Salon 94, his gallery in New York. And with Paul Johnson, Salon 94, they kind of really pushed for this also at Design Miami, I think 2 or 3 years ago. So then on the right, there's the project by Max Lamb, which I also really love, because it's based on the bike. It's like hand railings, and bike stands, but it actually works really well as a bench to hang out. And
we have one more shot of that.
These are Leon Ransmeyer. These are kind of loose structures that were scattered throughout the park, and that lend themselves well to kind of just various degrees of a resting assortment. Yes, it's a resting assortment. That's how it was called.
Experimental sitting. Yes.
Yeah. So, which allowed for various. And this is a Max Lamb. Again. Yeah. So I don't know if that. I'm trying to think. The selection is of designers or artists to work with. I think it really, but then it also really depends on the project. Like I said, I haven't done that many. So how was this project? I love viewers' questions. Okay. Okay. So yeah, I don't know. Did I answer that question?
Yeah, totally. Let me ask you one last question before we move on to the Swiss Institute project, which is just how this was received, the Superbenches exhibition, because it does seem like a remarkable infusion of what I might call cultural capital into an uninvested space. And I'm wondering what happened. Did the public gravitate to these works? Did they kind of intellectually engage with them as well as physically engage with them? What would you say happened?
Well, I would say it was 50% a success story and 50% a failure. Unfortunately, the beautiful piece by Ifani that I think that was on the first slide, as well as the shit bench, excuse me, but that's what it's called. It was made by Luca Cipoletti, which was the giant terracotta bricks that were actually made out of cow dung. So those have been completely damaged and ravaged, and I think it's tagged, destroyed. So that was the sort of the downside of it. But I think others, like Max Lamb's, I visited only one more time after the initial opening, and Max Lamb's pieces were really well received. They were kind of, because it is between, the park is situated right between a school and a sort of outdoor gym area. So, exercise area. So, they pass through there's kids passing through all the time, all day, and even during the winter. So, and they were all congregating around the Max Lamb benches. So I think, and then Philippe's structure has become some sort of almost mascot of the park. So, I think like I said, 50% really worked out, and then the other not so much. But I think that was also, we kind of knew going into this that it was a testing. It was, this was always intended as a sort of test for to see what actually works and what doesn't, and what the people of Järfälla would respond to and what they wouldn't respond to.
Yeah, I suppose you might say a 50% success rate when doing experimental design for the general public is a pretty high success rate, in fact. So, well, let's turn our attention now to the Swiss Institute show. So going from the green outdoors to the green indoors, and amazing. This I got to see in person. Didn't get to see Superbenches in Sweden, but this has the most indelible imprint on my memory as a space to walk into. And then the way that you use this kind of green screen background to create these digital interaction moments, which of course we can't really recreate here in PowerPoint. But I wonder if you could.
But this is a really great one to start on, because it actually shows exactly what happens in the show.
Yeah, so explain the kind of technological premise, perhaps, and then we'll back up to the intellectual premise.
Yeah, I think the whole premise of the show was to recreate, it was the 90th, I think it was in 2015, so it was the 90th, I think the Corbusier Foundation was celebrating 90 years of what was it, the 90 years of? Oh, yes. It was the 90th anniversary of Corbusier's pavilion at the Decorative Arts Showcase in Paris in 1925. Sorry, I had to.
Yeah.
And this pavilion caused a scandal back in the 20s because it was just unapologetically modernist and what was sort of the height of Art Deco in Paris. And it really kind of questioned a lot of the ways of living at the time. So the question was, what would be a similar scenario for 2015? And I worked with the artist Sean Maximo on this, who created a space that was entirely surveilled, with cameras throughout the space. And so the images of the cameras that the cameras captured were then projected onto flat screens that you see here on the right on the wall. And he created these rendered backdrops for the very, God, how do you explain this?
I was curious to see how you rendered it.
He created 3D rendered backdrops that showed the exact same scenario that you found yourself in, but again represented on the wall with a completely different background. Right.
So you were catapulted into this.
Sort of the classic chroma key technology. That's why everything is green. And so, but visitors found themselves, in the space that was entirely green, and it was actually in the space that is now Jeffrey Deitch again. At the time, it was Swiss Institute, and so it's a massive garage on Green Street. And is it Green Street?
Certainly down there, yeah.
Yeah, Worcester, I think. It's a massive former garage on Worcester Street, and with the really high ceilings. So you were in this giant green box, and because we painted the whole thing, the floor, the wall, everything. And but then you saw yourself on the screen in completely different environments. So here, for example, you see the the living room, which wasn't called the living room. I think it was called the Serenity Lounge. And but then as you were sitting on the sofa, for example, by Jesse Reeves, you saw yourself on the screen sitting on that very same sofa, but in the middle of the desert. And that concept continued throughout the show. When there was a bed, the big giant Rolu bed. Well, here this is the office, where when you sat on the office, you see the camera on the desk, and then on this flat screen in the background, you would actually find yourself in your home gym.
I have to say this shot is particularly unnerving to look at 5 years later, because it so accurately and presciently predicts the experience that we're having, well, at this very moment on Zoom, but the kind of pervasive experience of 2020.
Yes.
And it just makes me think about this as a project that echoes the futurism of Corbusier's original pavilion it's called the Pavilion of the New Spirit, Pavillion de L'Esprit Nouveau, right? So the pavilion of the spirit of the new, perhaps we could say. But there's also a kind of chilling predictive quality to both what he did and what you did. And I wonder if you could talk a little bit about that futurist aspect of the project, the extent to which you were trying to, I mean, in this case you did, but the extent to which the project as a whole was trying to capture something that was still coming.
Well, I think, the aspect of newness, and excitement. I think in 2015 was the year when the internet, which seemed, and sort of the technology of the internet that seemed very exciting still for many, many years, slowly crept into the mainstream, that not everything that came with that technology was also exciting and good.
Right.
So I think a lot of, and you can say the same thing 90 years earlier for modernism, and this sort of design for life that the likes of Corbusier and all those other architects that, Bauhaus and all those movements brought to life and propagated in the 20s and 30s. They were equally exciting and problematic. And so I think that was really what the show was getting at in the sense that, you created something that was at the same time beautiful and exciting, but also it was this highly claustrophobic space where you were being surveilled the entire time. You were always caught on camera. You were being filmed. It wasn't being recorded because, I guess we should have, but it was a live stream. So this is the bed, and I wish I had access to the image where it actually shows the bed in the rendering, because when you were on the bed, you were filmed, and your projection of you on the bed projected you onto an underwater panic room with a glass ceiling and an aquarium over it. So I think that's really this sort of weird dichotomy between future excitement about the future and technology and progress, and at the same time a disillusionment with it, is really what this show was about. I think.
Well, and also maybe this is obvious, but also the overlay.
Kind of the cameras. This is actually the image on the right. Oh God, this is terribly Photoshop. You shouldn't be seeing the ceiling over there. The image on the right shows you that what I was describing earlier, when you sat on the bench, on the sofa, on the Jesse Reeves sofa, you were being filmed by the camera that was on the wall, and then projected onto those two flat screens on the wall. So you saw yourself sitting in a desert pavilion with sort of solar panels around you, and lounging in the middle of the desert.
Yeah. So this also perhaps could serve as a segue to our next and last project, which is Blow Up at Friedman Benda, because here in the Swiss Institute, you created this rather destabilizing overlay between real space and virtual space. So you felt like you were simultaneously in both, which to me at least felt like it was sort of eroding my sense of secure location in both realms. In other words, I felt like I wasn't entirely in the virtual, nor was I entirely in real space. And I felt kind of constantly dislodged as I tried to navigate this experience. And it seems to me like the kind of heightened, but also somewhat unsettling quality of spatial experimentation was also true of this show, Blow Up at Friedman Benda. Although its aesthetic is so incredibly different, it does seem like there's a lot of shared intellectual territory between the two projects. So please tell us about this one, but also maybe tell us how you got from the Pavillion de L'Esprit Nouveau to Blow Up, and that transition for you intellectually.
Yeah, Blow Up, you know, there's 4 years between those two shows.
Yeah.
And I mean, we all know that in those 4 years, a lot of things happened. You know, 2015 was, you know, the 2016 election was still seemed very far away.
Right.
But the creeping sense of and what I just described earlier was already there. You know, the progress that we have been working, well, that sort of that Western society had been working towards over the past, you know, since the 90s maybe, was maybe not as always so positive as it was made out to be. But the idea of progress. And I think the Blow Up, the idea for Blow Up, or the overall concept for Blow Up, is very much a response to this disillusionment in a way. I think, I mean, there was a very concrete idea for Blow Up, just for the way it looked, because essentially what Blow Up was the idea of using a dollhouse interior and blowing it up, which is, you know, that's why it's called Blow Up. So, you know, having a kind of like a complete change in scale, and also playing with the topology of miniature furniture. So what does it look like when you have, and here, this is a great example. Thank you for keeping on this slide, because you have these chairs read left and right by Katie Stout, which she made especially for the show. It was an early student project of hers. These are actually based on enlarged versions of dollhouse chairs. So, you know, the sort of there was a playing with topologies and size and scale. So that was the original idea, but also what kind of very quickly transpired. And I was working for Swiss Institute, I was working with Sean Maximo for this show. I was working with Adam Charlotte-Hyman from Charlotte-Hyman and Herrero. And, you know, in working with Adam, and Andre to some extent from Andre Herrero, is you know, you know, there's a certain nostalgia that is associated also with dollhouses, right? And there's also dollhouses are used as almost like an instructional device for mostly young girls. You know, a kind of ideal world or ideal universe where you learn how to, I mean, I think traditionally, you know, also where you learn how to behave in a house, where you learn to chores, how to make your house pretty, and, you know, all these kind of domestic ideals that are transported through in a very playful way through dollhouses to mostly young girls. So I think this nostalgia, an almost saccharine nostalgia that dollhouses represent, is something that both Adam and I were really into. I mean, first of all, we were into the visuals of it, but we're also into sort of subverting it. So, it seemed like a very cute environment, but then there were, plenty of hints and details that were actually not cute at all. And both in the layout that in the exhibition design that Adam created, but also in the selection of pieces in the show.
Yeah.
So, for example, you see the Kuramada sofas, which are, they're like almost cartoonish shape of a sofa, but they're incredibly uncomfortable. I mean, I shouldn't say that, but they are incredibly uncomfortable. There was a crib in the show, soft Baroque actually, that was creepily moving, it had a sort of rotational motor in it that made the kind of rocking movement of a crib, but at the same time was like completely insane. I mean, no one in their right mind would put their toddler in a crib that made these jerking movements. So I think there was like sort of a double layer to all of these, and I think this idea of nostalgia also fit really well in 2019 or in this era that we live in. It's kind of, a lot of people revert to, and I don't mean, not to be overly literal with, make America great again, but I think, there is a sort of, among a large part of the population, there's a sort of desire to go back to something that is maybe comforting in this craziness that we live in, and that I think Blow Up also was a way to say, it may look cute, but it's not.
Right. It also, when you were talking about the Kuramada and its cartoon lines, it struck me that there's also a provocation here that's aimed not just towards American nostalgia or the cultivation of certain kind of normative ideals in young girls, but there's also, to me, a kind of pointed, not critique, but a sort of teasing out of what's going on with collectible design, with these extremely high-end, very considered design objects that were populating most of the exhibition. Because it struck me that you were saying, well, are these like props in a dollhouse? What are they exactly? Are they models for behavior? Are they tokens of something else, in the same way that a prop in a dollhouse is? And I don't know that there's a simple answer to that question of like, what were you saying about these pieces of furniture? But I thought that the context made those pieces of furniture seem really, really different, and maybe posed the question of what they had been in the first place and what they were for in the first place.
Well, I think I have a natural tendency to when I feel that something is taking itself too seriously, to kind of take it back, or remove the context in which it sort of feels too comfortable, and move it into a different context. And I think that's kind of a red thread throughout all the work in pinup, and also in the show at Swiss Institute, this show that we're talking about, maybe Superbenches, just also to some extent. So I think that is really at the heart of it, that when you put a Pesce in a dollhouse, is very different than a Pesce at the MoMA.
Yeah.
Even though it has its rightful place in both. But I think just objects start to have a different relationship to humans when they're removed from this idolatry, precious environment.
Well, that's a great place to leave it, and maybe move on to some questions, which we have a couple. Do you mind if we just go ahead and do that?
No, please.
Running pretty close.
Actually, maybe this is, and to just go back add one more thing, and I think it really does go back to this idea of queering things. I think that was the initial impulse with architecture. And I think that is also the impulse with, sort of design objects that are maybe have become too much of status symbols, And
yeah. Okay. Well, we've got a couple of questions.
I can't wait for the questions.
Go ahead and read out in the interest of time. So the first is from Christina Panchik, who is asking about pinup. So she says, what is the audience, or who is the audience for the publication? Architects, designers, artists? And if you don't mind, what's the circulation?
Well, I don't mind at all. The circulation is 35,000, and the audience is actually all of it, all of what you just listed. I think it's architects, it's designers, and I think creative industries in general, I think is who reads pinup and who's interested in those things we talk about.
Yeah, that's. I'll just say it again because it's an important point for us that in a lot of ways pinup has been doing in a totally different medium what we're trying to do in design and dialogue, which is to constitute both the content and the interaction zone of the design world, and also show that that's not a simple or easily drawn set of boundaries.
Right.
So we're bringing on people that are from the art world, from architecture, criticism, curation, just in the same way that you have. So I think it's just worth stressing the degree to which pinup has been an important influence on what we've been doing all year. So thank you for that. A question from Ashwini Bhatt, our regular listener, who asked about the 21st Century Show Home part of the aspect of the Swiss Institute project, and was just asking about the color green. So obviously it's a green screen. So it's
a green screen. It's chroma key green. We could have used blue, but I think green. I think that it was simply an aesthetic decision. But I think maybe emphasizing the 21st century part of it again is all the objects were in the show were selected based on materiality. So either materiality or production. None of them would have been. There was always an element about each object that would have made it impossible for it to be industrially produced before the year 2000. So whether it was, for example, Philippe Malouin, the Malo chairs, it was the stretch velvet that they used which I think was developed in the mid 2000s. So there's an element, and I think that was also, that to me was important to emphasize that, there was also, there was something distinctly 21st century about each of the objects.
Yeah, Joris Larman's maker chairs would be another great example of that.
Yeah, exactly.
Rapid prototyping technology. I think
you could argue some of the technology existed already in the 80s and 90s, but they were not made available to designers in that way until the year 2000.
Right. So that's another echo of the intentions of Corbusier, obviously wrestling with his own moment of new technology. I think Ashwini was also curious about green as a reference to the natural world and whether you were doing something there about like a new nature or.
Well, I think yes, and I think ultimately that's what led to choosing the color green instead of blue, is because we created one area which I don't think you saw in the images that we have here is there was a garden. So there was there was an area where we showed the oh my goodness, now I forgot the name, the Dutch duo with the dandelions.
Oh, Studio Drift.
Yes, Studio Drift. Yes, exactly. Studio Drift's piece, the encased dandelion lighting, and that area was called the. It was the garden area. So when you were in that area, you were actually digitally transported into a sort of garden, garden pavilion. It was actually a marijuana garden, I think, and peyote.
For good measure. Speaking of altered states. One last question from Stephen. This is actually a double because he asked two questions. And this goes back to pinup again. First, he wants to ask about your book, Pinup Interviews.
Oh, yes.
Talk about that. You have it handy. And then he also just wanted to ask about the parties.
Yes. What about it, Stephen? You want to?
Well,
I only do one-on-ones right now.
It is definitely another strategic instrument, those parties, right?
Yes, I think. Well, they are, and actually, I mean, it's kind of unfortunate that at the moment we're not able to do any events, and I've been reluctant to move those into the digital realm. I mean, for the thing that we're doing right now, it's fantastic, but every Zoom rave I've attended, not that many, but I felt it's not the right format for what pinup events are able to do, which is to, again, goes back to this idea of bringing a lot of different people from different backgrounds together, and yeah, I think it's been a really important part of the community building over the past, the lights, of the past 14, 15 years. So they'll be back.
Can't wait. And so do you want to close out just with a brief word about the interviews book?
The interviews book. Well, there will be a new one soon because it came out in 2013. It was a compilation of all the feature interviews that we've done in pinup, and because the feature interviews are really kind of at the core of the magazine, because they tend to be a little bit more off the cuff, especially with when they're mostly with architects, the kind of Q&A style. So these kind of conversations, especially the kind of conversations like the one we're having right now, is such an important part of the magazine. So that's why there's going to be a new one very soon. But the old one is just, I'm trying to find it. I really should have had it here, right here for you to. Oh, it exists in Mandarin too. One second, I can show you. Here, I have the Mandarin version. So for all those who read Mandarin, highly recommend it. And the English version is also available.
Lucy, I think you read Mandarin, don't you?
There you go. Lucy, I'm going to send you one.
Okay.
Oh, great.
I said that was going to be my last question, but actually we have one last one, which is too good not to read out, which is from Kevin. Felix, what is your favorite city in the world?
Oh, well, I mean, New York City.
All right. Love to hear it. Okay, well, that's all for today. Join us on Friday with Stephen, who is going to be interviewing the wonderful Beatrice Galilee, who you know.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
Amazing.
So, great independent architecture curator, and among her past achievements have been a tour of duty at the Metropolitan Museum.
Wait, which Stephen are we talking about now?
Stephen Burks.
Oh, amazing. Okay.
Yeah. So Stephen's going to be talking to her about that, the Lisbon Biennial that she curated, and lots of other stuff. So come on back Friday for Beatrice Galilee and Stephen Burks. Felix, thank you so much for doing this with us. It's been a huge pleasure and great to go through the last 15 years with you at this bullet train speed.
Thank you. Well, 14 and a half.
14. Truth in advertising.
Well, thanks for having me.
Okay. See you again soon.
Bye.